Good afternoon, and welcome to our Federal Judges Chat program. My name is Cheryl Rice, and it is my honor to serve as KBA president this year. It's also my pleasure today to briefly introduce you to Judge Suzanne H. Bauknight, who serves as U.S. Bankruptcy Court Judge here in Knoxville, and who has graciously agreed to host a conversation today with our newest federal judges. Originally from Hickory, North Carolina, Judge Bauknight obtained her undergraduate and law degrees, both magna cum laude, from the University of South Carolina. She practiced law for several years with the Baker Donaldson firm prior to joining the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Tennessee. She served as chief of the civil division of that office for several years before being elevated to the bench in November of 2014. Now, those of us who know Judge Bauknight know she's a very busy person. In addition to her judicial duties, she's a mom of two and is active in her church and in the community. Professionally, among other activities, she's a member of the Hamilton Burnett American Inn of Court, having served as its president just a couple of years ago. She's an associate editor of the American Bankruptcy Law Journal. She leads a local program that encourages disadvantaged youth to pursue careers in the law. And closest to home for today's purposes, she is co-chair of the Government and Public Service Lawyers section of the Knoxville Bar Association. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Judge Suzanne Bauknight.
Thank you, Cheryl. I didn't even think about that you were going to give such an introduction. Thank you. That was very kind. It is my honor today to be able to be here to present to you three new federal judges. Now, one has been on the bench a little while, and the other two are really pretty new. So I'm just going to walk through some questions and let them introduce themselves to you. They have some really stellar backgrounds. I'll start with Judge Atchley, who I know because I'm always glad to see, anytime I see in the country an AUSA get elevated to becoming a judge, I know they're going to be a great judge because that is great training ground for doing justice, and that's what judges are supposed to do. So for all of you, I'm going to go do a little round robin. Just say, tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you grew up, where you went to school, a little bit about your family, and I will start with Judge Atchley.
No, thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. And I'd like to thank the bar for hosting this event. I have a real soft spot for the KBA. I've been a member for 28 years, and I think it's a great organization. I'm a native of East Tennessee. I grew up in Jefferson County, went to Jefferson County High School, and undergraduate at the University of Tennessee and law school at Samford University. I started out, I was in private practice very briefly in Sevierville, but went to the district attorney's office pretty quickly. I practiced in the DA's office for almost 8 years. Worked for District Attorney Al Schmutzer. I know many of you out there that work in some of the state courts probably remember General Schmutzer, and then started in the U.S. Attorney's Office in 2001. Stayed there until getting sworn in this past December.
Right. So also our other new district judge, Judge Katie Crytzer, comes from the Department of Justice as well and has been in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Judge Crytzer, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Judge Bauknight, thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you to Cheryl and the KBA for holding this event. As Judge Bauknight mentioned, I come to the Eastern District of Tennessee from the Department of Justice, where I served as the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Office of Legal Policy there. Before heading up to Main Justice in Washington, I served as an Assistant United States Attorney in the Eastern District of Kentucky in Lexington. While I was there, I worked on fraud cases, drug cases on both the criminal and the civil side. Moving back to sort of my connections to East Tennessee, as a child, my family moved all over the United States. My father was an auditor, first for the Army and then for the Department of Energy. My family spent about a 4-year stint in Kaiserslautern, Germany. And when we came back to the United States, my mother made it very clear that we were settling somewhere. And my family chose to settle in East Tennessee. I went to middle school here in Knoxville. I'm a graduate of Farragut High School, then went to college at Middle Tennessee State University, where I was part of the Honors College there, and went to law school at Scalia Law just outside of Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm glad that you have returned to East Tennessee, to your roots. Well, I guess they were sort of later, a little bit of a later route, but still we're so glad that you're here. I want to go now to Judge Cindy Wyrick. Magistrate Judge, you were sworn in last year, earlier in the year, and we had 2 investitures scheduled for you, and neither could be held because of COVID. So we'll talk about, hopefully, investiture issues maybe later. But Judge Wyrick, tell us a little bit about yourself. We know you also have deep Tennessee roots.
True. Thank you, Judge Bauknight, for engaging us in this conversation. I was excited, frankly, to get to spend a little time seeing my fellow judges. We have not been able to gather in person, just as others have not. So that's great. And I appreciate the KBA giving us this opportunity. I grew up primarily in Campbell County. After being born, I know that most of you would guess this. I was born in Warren, Michigan. I know you can tell from the accent. It really did not stay very long. Grew up in Campbell County until my senior year in high school, and we moved my senior year to Bowling Green, Kentucky. So I do have that connection with Judge Crytzer, that Kentucky connection. The first 2 years of undergrad went to Western Kentucky in Bowling Green, but the Tennessee mountains drew me back home, and finished undergrad at UT, got my law degree at UT, and from there clerked for Judge Goddard on the Court of Appeals, and then Judge Wade on the Court of Criminal Appeals at that time. Made my way to Sevierville to private practice, where I stayed until going on the bench September 30 of 2019. So yesterday was my 1.5 year anniversary on the bench.
Oh, time does fly. I hope you've been having fun, notwithstanding COVID.
I started to say it has been, despite the challenges of COVID, and boy, have we had some challenges.
I want to let everyone know also that we do have a chat. So if there are questions that you want to ask, I'll monitor that. If the questions are appropriate, I will ask them. So let's talk a little bit about your years in practice and how you think that your particular experience has prepared you to do the job you're now doing. I'm going to start with Judge Crytzer. I know from having been in government practice and having been in private practice, which is your experience, that those are different, right? So can you tell us how you think your government practice prepared you for your work as a judge any differently than private practice, if you think it had a different effect on your preparation to be a judge?
Judge, you're absolutely right. I spent about 4 years in private practice at a big law firm in Washington, D.C. before joining the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I'm grateful for both of those experiences, but the mission was really quite different in private practice than in government service. When I became an AUSA, just like Judge Atchley, we take a solemn oath to support and defend the Constitution, really to do justice. And for me, that was a materially different mission than the mission at the big law firm, where my sole job was to zealously advocate for my clients. I think both of those experiences are good. They've been valuable in shaping who I am, my judicial philosophy. But really, the most impactful service for me was my time at the Department of Justice.
And Judge Wyrick, I know that you have spent a lot of your efforts outside of the practice of law in bar leadership. And thank you for just the leadership activities that you have been engaged in across the state, former TBA president, and even serving on TLAP as late as last year when you were appointed. Can you just talk to us about what impact you think that bar leadership experience has had on you in the job that you're doing now as a magistrate judge?
You know, it's interesting. I see it as impacting my job as a judge in some fairly technical ways and then in some more overarching ways. On the technical side, being in bar leadership, oftentimes you're called upon to run a meeting. And what are your goals when you run a meeting? You want to, certainly keep the meeting flowing and preside over the meeting, but you also want to make sure everybody feels like they were engaged in the process, that they were heard in the process, that they're bought into the process. So from a technical aspect, I think it allowed me to hit the ground running in terms of more effectively running a courtroom from the technical aspect. But also, I think that process and being involved in bar activities overall gave me an opportunity to better understand the challenges that we face as a judiciary, and also the great importance of the public perception that truly we are providing a fair and impartial system. So I think it, cued me in more from the start to the importance of not only providing that fair and impartial format, but remembering that it's important for people to know that you're committed to that. Lawyers may know that a little more, still good to, for them to hear, but litigants especially need to understand that. So I think those were very helpful things.
Thank you. So Judge Atchley, I know you and I have talked before. In fact, we did a piece with Nick for Dicta about the importance of wearing the white hat at the Department of Justice. And I think maybe Judge Crytzer might have addressed that issue, but to the extent that your supervision of lawyers at the U.S. Attorney's Office, most recently as the top career AUSA, as the first assistant AUSA, or otherwise as your work representing the government. Can you talk about how those things have prepared you to do the job you're doing now as a federal judge?
Well, working in the U.S. Attorney's Office generally prepared me because it was exclusively in federal court, and I really got to know it well over 20 years. It's still a lot to learn, but the longer you work in a system, the more familiar you become with it, and you see the things that, in your opinion, work really well, and the things that you might want to change just a touch. As far as supervising other lawyers, I learned a lot from supervising other lawyers. I was really blessed in that all the lawyers I supervised were better lawyers than I was, and so you learn a lot. And I learned that there was different ways to approach things, both of them successfully. And I also learned to appreciate different skill sets. You have people that are really good trial lawyers. You have other people that are exceptional writers, and how they both can arrive at the same place, but they're different ways.
That broad-based perspective, even in the sort of cloistered environment of the U.S. Attorney's Office, I think does help coming to the bench to just understand people do bring different skills and abilities, and to have an open mind and to listen, I think, is another important piece that all of you have experienced in your careers. So we're here to talk professionally, but let me just ask this one sort of personal question, and I'll start with you, Judge Wyrick. Is there anything you can tell us about your personal side, your hobbies or your interests outside of the practice of law that you're willing to share with our folks?
Well, I may have to ask you a question. Does carting your children around to their various sporting events count as a hobby? Because
yeah. It's a second job, actually, probably.
Yes. Right now, that seems to be much of my hobby time. But in those rare times that I have a little time that I can pick the agenda for the day, it would be hiking, backpacking, love to travel, park me at the beach anytime. So those are a few of the things. But actually, as much as I joke about it, love carting my children around and getting to watch them do what they love. So that's a lot of fun.
It's fun to cheer on your children.
Yes, it is.
And I'm going to go to Judge Atchley because I know that you do that as well with your daughter. And whether you want to talk about her or something else, tell us something about your personal side.
Well, I do really enjoy spending time with my daughter. She's 10 and she's such a blessing. And so most of my free time is devoted to her. When I'm not doing that, I enjoy playing golf and spending time outdoors. And I absolutely love to go up to our farm and piddle. I don't accomplish a lot up there. And if you have to farm for a living, that's a difficult thing to do. But farming in the capacity in which I'm doing it is a lot of fun.
How about you, Judge Crytzer? Hopefully there's something in East Tennessee, back here in Knoxville, where you were before, that you particularly enjoy outside or otherwise.
There are a few things. My husband and I met playing law firm softball, and we both still play softball. I have to admit that I'm not nearly as quick as I used to be, and truth be told, neither is he. But we still play, and we play together on a co-ed team. I'm also a bit of a novice gardener. I'm not the best gardener, but there's something about seeing the fruits of your labor when a flower blooms, or I had some berries not too long ago that actually grew. I had a handful of blueberries, not a whole lot to speak of, but there's something satisfying about literally seeing the fruits of your labor.
Well, we do live in a beautiful place to be able to grow things and get outside, and I'm so glad that spring has arrived, although today is a little chilly and tonight we have a freeze warning. You never know, you just have to wait a moment in East Tennessee and it will change. All right, well, let me come back to you then, Judge Crytzer, and ask you, if you had to name a single personal or professional experience that most prepared you to become a federal judge, what would you say about that?
I'm really fortunate that throughout my career, I've had some amazing experiences. When I was in law school, I had the opportunity to intern for a district court judge, and that was great. And even to my most recent position before coming to the bench, I had the opportunity to work for Attorney General Bill Barr, which was an amazing experience. But I think the single most important experience for me was my time clerking for Judge Ray Grunder on the 8th Circuit. I learned so much about the humility, the diligence, the commitment to the rule of law that really is required once you put on a robe. And I'm still so grateful for that opportunity and his mentorship.
I like to say that I wear this mantle that I can't ever really remove. And I'm blessed and honored to do that, but I have to be aware of it. And clerking for a judge did that for me as well, just made me more aware of that role. Judge Atchley, how about you? What one thing would you say might have prepared you?
Well, it'd be difficult to name just one, because I really feel like I've benefited in some way from everything that I've done. I've been very lucky in that I've got to do a lot of different things. I spent a lot of time in the state court system. And, I spent more time in the federal court system, but I really learned a lot in the state court system. And I will tell you, and for the practitioners out there that go to the state courts, that's where the rubber really meets the road. Vast majority of people that have exposure to the justice system in the United States are going to have it in the state court system, and they're going to have it probably in the general sessions courts. Which is where, most people will end up that have some exposure. And I really learned a lot about people. And I learned a lot about their problems and their troubles and dealing with them and dealing with witnesses and dealing with victims. And probably learned more from that and about life than anything else.
That's interesting. Judge Wyrick, how about you? Is there any one thing you could put your finger on that has really prepared you to take on this role?
Well, Judge Bauknight, typically I'm a real rules follower. I may cheat just a little on this one because, as with my colleagues, I have a tough time distilling it to the one thing. But I want to pivot on something that Judge Atchley said, talking about understanding and learning people. And for me, one of the things that I think best prepared me was where I grew up. I've always said I grew up middle class. I think that was probably on the lower end of middle class, but my parents did a good job never letting us really know that one way or the other. But growing up in Campbell County, it's a very diverse area. You have some haves, if you will, some have nots. And what I learned from that is that we all put our pants on in the same way. And I think it gave me a sense of how important it is that everybody, and this is something my family instilled in me, everybody is to be treated with respect. We all matter. We all have different jobs to do, but there are lots of other jobs that I'm sure those of us in this program do not want to be doing, that we're grateful to have others that want to do and are doing. So that was very important, I think, to me in understanding and appreciating the need to treat everyone fairly, but also clerking. I agree with Judge Crytzer. That was a very important thing for me to have the opportunity to do, to see how the way the judges I worked for treated the lawyers that came before them. And that was a great experience. But then my bar service as well. And I won't go back through that other than to say, and just, put in a plug for bar service overall. I'm sure that Marcia and Cheryl won't mind to say that my bar service was always my opportunity to do what I went to law school to do, which was to make a difference. And so the opportunity to make a difference in the justice system and the challenges that it faced, that was nice preparation to transition to this opportunity to make a difference. So long answer, I'll shorten up the next one. So
That's all right. Thank you, Judge Wyrick. So Judge Atchley, you probably have heard me say that the biggest difference I find between the practice of law, at least government practice of law, and being a judge is that I actually now have enough resources to do my job. What would you say is the biggest difference for you between practicing law, being an AUSA or otherwise practicing law, and now being a judge?
Well, aside from the obvious answer to that, which is you're no longer an advocate, for one side or the other, which I think everyone understands. I think the thing that I knew coming in, and I still am getting used to a little bit, is the fact that I have complete control over my own time for my entire career. And it wasn't a bad thing. I worked for other people, but my schedule was set either by the court or it was set by someone that I worked for or worked with, and very timeline driven. And I'm very proud of the fact that in my entire career, I never missed a deadline, not a single filing, not a court appearance, not anything. And my clerks have had to remind me repeatedly when I ask them about when something's set, and they said, well, it's set when you set it. So that's the biggest difference.
Yes, and that is a lovely difference, I must admit. Although we all come to the bench with work ethics that I think, it resulted in us being appointed. And so it can be hard sometimes when you realize that you have that freedom and you're like, wait a minute, I feel like I should be churning all the time. Judge Crytzer, how about you? What do you find to be the biggest difference between the practice and being a judge?
For me, like Judge Atchley mentioned, it's sort of moving out of the executive into the judiciary where you're not an advocate. And also for me, sort of the gravity of the decisions that are being made every day. Every small decision in chambers is a big decision to someone. It affects their life, their liberty, their livelihood. And the reality of that, we all know it when you're looking at nomination, but the reality of that, it weighs quite heavy.
Judge Wyrick, how about you? What's the biggest difference you found?
I think, as both of my colleagues have said, that stepping out of the advocate role is absolutely a change. One of the things I have found is that during a hearing, and I will ask clarifying questions sometimes, but it is difficult when you want the lawyers to ask something and they don't. But it's really not appropriate for you as the judge to ask it, because it's the duty of the parties to put in the proof they think is appropriate for the court to hear. So that's been interesting for me to try to balance that out. What's okay to clarify versus stepping over out of that judicial into that role that could be seen as advocating on either side, that could cause somebody to wonder if you were being fair both ways. So that's been challenging.
Or if you hear a question that clearly is intended to will elicit hearsay, and you look at the other side to see if they're going to object, sort of like I do with my classes at UT.
Yes, wondering if they're awake. Yes. Yeah.
Judge Crytzer, can you tell us what you are most enjoying now that you are I guess you are going on 4 months in, is that right?
I think that's right, going on 4 months in. Each of us that you see before you today are incredibly fortunate to have talented and wise and kind colleagues. And getting to know each of them personally has been my own sort of greatest delight in the job so far. I knew that I was going to love the work. I knew that the advocates were going to strongly advocate on behalf of their clients. But it's been a real joy to get to know my colleagues personally.
Great. How about you, Judge Wyrick? You're now 18 months or more. You're going on a little more in, yeah.
18 months. It's hard to believe. I've really enjoyed stepping out of that advocate role and getting the opportunity to sit back and listen and to hear from both sides in a neutral way. That has been fun for me. Really enjoyed getting back to the long ago criminal law roots from when I clerked for Justice Wade. That it surprised me just how much I knew I would enjoy it, but just how much I've enjoyed that. Certainly echo Judge Crytzer's comments about working with such a great group of judges and my Greenville court family here as well. It's just been a wonderful opportunity despite the craziness of COVID. So,
Judge Atchley, you've heard the other two judges talk about colleagues, and you have sort of been a member of the court family in some way, because the U.S. Attorney's Office here in the courthouse, and you appeared in court more than most attorneys in the bar, of course. But what for you has been most enjoyable in your 4 months, almost 4 months?
Well, I have to say it was a bit of a surprise to me, and might be a surprise to some others, but I really enjoyed the civil practice of law. I was, for all intents and purposes, an exclusively criminal practitioner. Even in my supervisory role, when I was first assistant, while I supervised the civil division or the civil chief, really, it always ran so well. I always learned that it was best for me to stay out of it and let the civil division run itself. But I have really, I really enjoyed it. I don't think anyone knows any area of the law as an expert, I guess. And while I'd spent a lot of time in criminal law, there's always more to learn. But that was really true for the civil area, and I just enjoyed it. And the lawyers, both in Chattanooga and in Knoxville, they've been excellent, and the cases are interesting. And it's been a while since I've really gotten up early and enjoyed coming into work. as much as I do right now.
Yes, I see your car down there early, as well as Judge Crytzer's. You guys are working hard. I see that. So I'm going to throw, it's not a curveball, I'm sure, but it's not one that I was on the list. We have a participant, an attendee today, who's asked a really good question. We just talked about what you like most at this moment in your judicial career. Here's a question about do you have a pet peeve yet? I'm going to start with Judge Wyrick, because I bet she has one with 18 months on the bench that comes immediately to mind, and that'll give Judge Crytzer and Judge Atchley a moment to think about it. Judge Wyrick?
Well, I do have, and I'll say this. If I ever go back into private practice, which I'm not anxious to do, I'll say for the record, but if I ever go back into private practice, I've learned a whole lot of what I would not do that I did as a lawyer prior to taking the bench. It's amazing how that perspective makes you sort of cringe as you think back about your own court appearances at times when you think, oh yeah, I might not have handled that way if I was doing that again now. But I think for me, the biggest thing is collegiality. And the reason that it is so important is not just that I want us all to be able to get along and sing kumbaya, in a circle. It is that not only do I think it's important for lawyer health and happiness in the profession, but I think it's important in terms of people seeing our system as fair and impartial. If you have lawyers that are criticizing judges to their clients, are indicating to their clients that the judge is not being fair, as opposed to they disagree with the judge's ruling, if they're saying their opposing counsel is doing something inappropriate or sneaky or not following the rules, versus they disagree with their counterpart's approach, I think it can undermine public confidence in our system, which I think is critical. So for me, if lawyers are having an issue, whether it's a discovery issue, and I see lots of those, come to the court early with those. Let's have a chambers conference right now. That'll be a Zoom chambers conference. But let's talk through it. Let's get things back on track, as opposed to nasty motions flying back and forth. So that is my pet peeve, is the potential harm to our system by lawyers not being as professional as they need to be.
Civility is definitely very important. We see in our society right now the lack of civility in almost every area. And so for us to, as legal professionals, not just judges, but if the lawyers can be a model for that civility, maybe we can draw people back from the edge of that cliff. I agree with that. Judge Crytzer, have you developed a pet peeve in your first few months?
I'm not sure it's a newly developed pet peeve for me. I think it's always been a pet peeve for me. But like Judge Atchley, I am a stickler for deadlines and for the rules. It is disrespectful to your clients and to the court if folks are consistently missing deadlines. I think that also is part of the civility here. You're also placing opposing counsel in a tough spot. If you're missing deadlines, you put them in a strange spot, and they've got other things going on their dockets too. So that's always been a pet peeve of mine. I think our district and the judges in this district look kindly upon appropriate extensions if you need them. Don't blow a deadline. Seek an extension. Give everybody the respect that is due.
I wholeheartedly agree. Judge Atchley, how about you?
Well, I hate to parrot everyone, but and nothing has quite risen to the level of a pet peeve for me yet. Everything's really gone smoothly so far, and everyone's been gracious. But it would be deadlines. I mean, I always met deadlines, and if you've got we all get behind the eight ball. I mean, there are just times when you can't get something done, and you've been diligent at it, and it happens to everyone. And I can't imagine any judge in this district not being reasonable about granting extensions, but blowing through deadlines and then going radio silent is something that I have little difficulty with.
I bet most judges would say that too. So you have all chosen to use your judicial assistant position. So let me just lay this out. I'm not sure if practitioners know, but federal judges, district judges have a right to 2 law clerks and a judicial assistant to do more administrative types of things in chambers. And magistrate judges have a right to 1 law clerk and a judicial assistant. You all have chosen to use your if I could say it, judicial assistant position as another law clerk position, so that Judge Crytzer and Judge Atchley, you each have 3 law clerks, and Judge Wyrick, you have 2. So could you tell us a little bit about your staff, and if there is any delineation between your law clerks that folks would want to know about? I will start with Judge Crytzer.
As Judge Bauknight mentioned, I've forgone a judicial assistant. There are days where I regret that decision, but I'm learning how to manage some of these things myself. Even something as easy as logging onto a Zoom call can be challenging if things don't go just the right way, but I still think it's the right decision. I have 3 incredibly talented and well-qualified law clerks, and I'm so grateful that each of them was willing to leave their current positions at the very end of December to join me in chambers. In my chambers, all 3 of my law clerks handle both civil and criminal cases as the docket dictates. We do have some screening issues that we work through, so there isn't a clean-cut delineation. So if you have a case and you need to contact chambers about that particular case, the best way to do that is through our chambers email address. All 3 law clerks and I have access to that email address, and we can make sure that whatever you need is taken care of and given to the correct law clerk.
Is any one of your clerks, Judge Crytzer, a career clerk at this point, or a more treated in any kind of way as a more senior clerk?
No, they are all treated equally. I anticipate that at least for probably the first 5 or 6 years, I'm not going to hire a career law clerk. I've got folks who are either here with me for 2 years or 1 year. Right now, I'm going to have the same staff and we're fully hired up until 2022. But at that point, I anticipate adding 2 new law clerks to the team.
Okay, all right. How about you, Judge Wyrick? Can you tell us about your clerks and what folks should know about how the work might be delineated between them?
I also am blessed with 2 outstanding clerks. I have Emma Steele. She is my career clerk, so she is the one that will be the constant in the office. But then I also have Anderson Gass, who started back in August of last year, and who is serving a 2-year clerkship. There is some delineation. Emma handles more of the scheduling than Anderson does, but he also carries part of those duties. As with Judge Crytzer, we have not broken it down by civil versus criminal or necessarily by duty. Anderson typically handles search warrant requests. So, there are a few of those things, but for us, we have had some issues with our chambers email. I think they may have finally gotten that corrected, but the best way to reach out to chambers is either by emailing, including Emma and Anderson both on an email, or by calling chambers and speaking with either one that answers the phone is just fine. I will say this in terms of pro tip for those participating today. Please remember that how you treat law clerks, frankly, is probably more important even than how you treat the court, because if someone is good to my law clerks, that says a lot to me about their character. If someone is not polite or talks down to my law clerks, who are very bright attorneys, that also says something. And they tell the judges. We know if someone is unkind or unprofessional. So there is your tip for the day. Be good to the law clerks.
The same applies, I would say, to clerk's office staff.
Absolutely, 100%.
All right, so you mentioned emails. So the email configuration, if you don't know, would be the first name of the person and then a dot and then the last name of, am I doing that right? No, it's not a dot, it's an underscore. That's an old email. And an underscore and then the last name. And it's going to be then at TNED, as in Tennessee Eastern District, .uscourts.gov, TNED.uscourts.gov. So, and then the chamber's email that Judge Crytzer talked about, I believe is Crytzer_chambers at TNED.uscourts.gov. And Judge Atchley, I know yours is that because I just sent a letter of recommendation to it earlier today. But can you talk to us about your 3 law clerks and how you are assigning work between them and such?
Okay. So yes, I opted for 3 clerks instead of a judicial assistant. I think that is going to be the way to go for me. The word processing and document preparation has just gotten to the point that I don't know that a judicial assistant would be necessary for me. And the clerks, they're very good at it. I mean, their stuff comes back and it's just very well done. I have 3, Kelly Walsh, Mark Russell, and Aaron Steelman. I hired them all as term law clerks. However, Kelly's going to stay on as a career clerk. If you have a question about anything, also just use the chamber's email. It goes to all 3 of them and they read it. Cases are distributed based upon the last digit of the filing, whether it's civil or criminal. They get both civil and criminal work, and it's just randomly goes to them based upon the numbering that comes out of the clerk's office. I might move a particular case to one or from one to the other based upon a workload issue or something like that, but for the most part, it falls that way. I'd like to sort of echo what Cindy said, which is be good to them, because if you're not, they will cut your throat.
Let me ask you, Judge Crytzer and Judge Atchley, if you have selected or where you are in the process of selecting a courtroom deputy.
I've got one, Allison Laster, in Chattanooga, and she will be with me in Chattanooga. If I come to Knoxville for something, I have a lot of matters in Knoxville also, a lot of civil cases. She'll travel with me also to the extent she can.
Okay. Thank you. Judge Crytzer?
Judge, I've hired Jason Huffaker to work with me. Jason's previously worked with the court, worked for Judge Phillips, so folks will be familiar with him.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, so Judge Atchley and Judge Wyrick, and I warned you about this. I've looked at the court's website. We also have a question from Adrian Anderson about preferences, but I see that you've not yet posted any judicial preferences. Do you plan to do so? And if so, when do you think that might be? And have you identified anything that you think will be different in any kind of meaningful way from the other magistrate judges for you, Judge Wyrick, or from the other district judges for you, Judge Atchley? And then I'm going to go to Judge Crytzer, who saw my question earlier in the week, and she was already on it, and she got it done before today. So you can, if you want to see hers, they are there, but I'll ask her a question about them in a minute. So let me start with Judge Wyrick. You don't have judicial preferences on there. Can you tell us if you plan to do so, and whether you do or not, could you just name a preference or 2 that you have that might be different than either Judge Corker when he was a magistrate judge or any of the Knoxville magistrate judges, for example?
Well, one would think, since I've been on the bench a year and a half and don't have them posted, I might not intend to post them, but it has been on my to-do list for quite some time. Unfortunately, with COVID and Greenville being extremely busy as of late, it keeps getting backburnered. I I do have some preferences, though. I touched on one previously, but I'll just briefly mention, if parties have discovery disputes before motions are filed, it is important to the court that we first try to resolve it via either a telephone conference, which is what I typically do, or by video conference. To me, I think when lawyers tend to get sideways with each other, it is more over discovery issues than at any other point, it seems like, in the litigation. So if I can help lawyers lay those issues to rest quickly and early on, I think it promotes civility throughout the course of the case, and also leaves everybody feeling like that process is as fair as possible. So that's a big one. Just reach out to Chambers. We'll schedule you a conference fairly quickly. Now, I will say there have been times when, because of the complexity of the dispute or having ongoing issues, then the court will say file a motion at that point. So we can't always resolve it that way. The overwhelming amount of the time we can. And let me see, I think I had, just to let people know in terms of hearings before the court or trials, as a general rule, because there are so many pre-hearing, pre-trial filings typically in federal court, I generally do not have opening statements. If parties have something burning, they just really think they need to tell the court, I'm not going to absolutely say you can't have one. But at the same time, I typically do not have opening statements for that reason.
Okay, thank you. Judge Atchley, how about you? Any preferences you've developed at this point?
You know, I'm surprised at how much I've been asked about this. I did one for the Federal Bar Association in Chattanooga. It was their hot question. I've gotten it from a couple of lawyers on the street. I haven't posted them yet because I haven't completely formulated them. I'm still kind of thinking about some things, and I didn't want to change anything midstream on someone. I don't think there's going to be anything out there that is surprising or shocks anyone's conscience. It's going to be pretty standard as to what the practice is across the district. There are some differences between how things are done among some of the judges. I know that in Chattanooga, changes of plea in criminal matters are usually referred to a magistrate judge. I'm going to take my own changes of plea, at least initially, and do those myself. I also have received some questions. I got a lot of questions out of the Federal Bar Association about what my view would be on 11C1C plea agreements in criminal matters, and whether or not I would agree to or I would sign agreed orders disposing of supervised release revocations. And my answer to that is both yes, I will consider both of those. There are some other judges in the district maybe prefer to have hearings on those matters or are not fond of 11C1C plea agreements. But that's something I will consider also. Those were two things I've been asked about more than one time. But I promise you, I'll get my preferences up there soon. I wanted to think it through, but evidently I need to get them up. So I'll get them posted.
Hey, you're the judge. You can post them and then change them.
I know that. But
it's like scheduling. It's up to you.
I thought to myself, I'll do that. And a couple of weeks later, I'll change something, and someone will have looked at something a few weeks ago and feel like they got caught a little flat-footed, and I didn't want that to happen.
All right, Judge Crytzer, you actually put yours together. Is there anything in particular that you want to note for folks?
Judge, I'll tell you, these have been a labor of love, and like the other judges on our panel here, I fully reserve the right to change them at any point as my preferences change. I think that when folks take a look at them, they'll see they are relatively basic, but just wanted to get something out there so that the parties could understand how I'm going to proceed and could have some sense of expectations. As Judge Atchley mentioned, I do take my own change of pleas. I think that's consistent with the practice here in Knoxville. But I also anticipate that in some civil cases, I will hold Rule 16 conferences. I think there can be some value there. If civil litigants are signaling to the court in their 26F report that there may be some need for a Rule 16 conference, I anticipate accommodating that need so that we can move these cases along efficiently.
Well, actually, I'm going to skip over the next question for the moment that I had scheduled, because I think you've given me a good segue to mediation orders in civil cases. Some judges in our district, for example, Senior Judge Greer, when I was practicing before him, he would order mediation in every civil case. And so I'm wondering what you're thinking about that, Judge Crytzer, as you talk about the scheduling conferences and sort of the hands-on case management that some judges like to engage in.
Yeah, I think mediation and arbitration can be useful tools. If you have parties that are far enough along in their case that they understand what their strengths are and what the weaknesses are in their case, those things can be useful. I don't anticipate that, like Judge Greer, I will order the parties to mediation in every civil case, but in the right case where we're in sort of the right phase of the case, I think it can be useful.
Judge Atchley, what's your thought about mediation?
I agree with Judge Crytzer. I will not order it in every case, but I certainly would in the appropriate case. And I think that it works. It doesn't always work, and I think sometimes lawyers know when it's not going to work, and I trust their judgment on it. And I would certainly not order a mediation in something like that.
It could certainly help to clarify issues. Judge Wyrick, when someone's consenting to you talk about mediation, and also I'm not aware of what Judge Corker is doing, if he's following in the shoes of Judge Greer with generally ordering it in each case. Can you speak to that as well?
I wish I could. As to Judge Corker, I haven't asked him about that. I do think he is a believer in the process, and I am a big believer in the mediation process. I probably fall somewhere between what Judges Crytzer and Atchley have said and what Judge Greer does. I don't believe it's beneficial from my perspective to order it in every single case, but I will say that for the most part, I'm going to want cases to have been to mediation before there is a trial. I will listen to the lawyers tell me why it's not a good case for mediation and be open-minded. But I know my experience as a practitioner was, and I'd say the same is true for most everybody participating in this proceeding, some of the cases I was just sure would settle, didn't. But then there were those that I would not have thought for 1 minute we'd resolve, that somehow Christmas miracle-wise they did. So I'm hesitant to just not really carefully consider mediation because of that experience.
All right, so we are all hoping and praying that we are seeing the light at the end of the COVID tunnel. I myself have had vaccine number 1, or vaccination number 1, with the second coming here in about a week or 10 days. I hope you all are also working towards that personally, but let's talk about professionally and in your courtrooms. What are you thinking in terms of how COVID-19, what procedures you're following currently, and whether you see any changes in the short term, what your plan is, if you have one, what kind of factors you're looking at, that kind of thing, regarding scheduling of hearings or limiting the number of people in the courtroom, whether folks have to wear a mask or not. When they're at the podium, for example, do they also have to wear a mask? If otherwise they are. Any other requirements that you'd want folks to know about with regard to COVID. And I'll come to you, Judge Wyrick, and ask you first.
It has been interesting in our district. I think Chief District Judge McDonough has taken a very judge by judge approach, certainly a courthouse by courthouse approach, because of COVID numbers being different in different areas in our district. Here in Greenville at this point, we have had, I don't know if a verdict is back yet, but we are at least in the process of our second criminal jury trial within the last couple of weeks. We have a very significant criminal jury trial coming up that is of a longer duration. We are having grand jury proceedings again. We're going to have our first CVB docket in a little while here in April. We are doing some in-person proceedings. Still, most of what we're doing is by Zoom. I don't anticipate there being a rapid changeover, but I do expect that slowly we will be getting back more to in-person. With that said, I will note that as uncomfortable as COVID has made all of us, and as much as all of us are tired of endless Zoom proceedings, I think that the process has caused us to innovate and think about some things. For instance, motions to continue in criminal cases. We did all of those in person. Sometimes folks would call in. Since then, since COVID, we have typically been doing those by email. And that probably will not change because it's been something that the lawyers have really liked. It's been effective. We've been able to do it in a constitutionally sound way. And so I think trying to take some good from COVID, we'll continue with some of those things. But it is a work in process.
So we have 3 minutes left, and I'm trying to honor everyone's time, including the judge's time. Judge Crytzer, is there anything that you could tell us about your COVID-19 procedures quickly?
The court is taking a thoughtful approach that recognizes folks' constitutional rights and their interests and still maintains safety here at the courthouse.
Judge Atchley, you're between two courthouses. How are you approaching these difficult issues?
Anxious to get back to in-person hearings. Social distance while you're in the courtroom, wear a mask when you're not speaking. You can use the podium if you'd like.
And we all have the plastic up in the courtrooms and that kind of thing. We have it even though we haven't had any in-person hearings since last March. Is there anything in the last 2 minutes, anything that you all would like to say to folks as we leave today? I'll just say, just jump in.
I would like Suzanne to follow up on something you mentioned earlier, which was my service to TLAP. I want to very quickly say to the lawyers participating today that while COVID has been very challenging for the courts, all of us as judges are very mindful of how difficult it has been to be in private practice during COVID times. I know that people are struggling, judges struggle, lawyers struggle. TLAP is there as a support for both judges and lawyers. It truly is free. It truly is confidential. I can say that. I've seen it. I've been there. TLAP's number is 877-424-8527. If you are struggling, please reach out and use that. And if we as a court can help you, we're here to do that.
Thank you. I really appreciate you doing that. And I put that number in the chat for anyone who didn't get it down. And you, of course, can find it on the TBA's website as well. Anything from you, Judge Crytzer? Judge Atchley?
I just wanted to thank the KBA for the warm welcome home.
Thank you, all three of you, for participating today, for taking the time to do this. It's been a joy to get to know each of you a little bit better, myself, and I know that the bar is benefiting from this. So thank you for taking the time. Thank you for your service and your commitment to the people of East Tennessee. We very much appreciate each of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending today.